Hi everyone, how are we all today? We good? Whose first event of the year is this? Okay, keep your hand up if it's your first event since COVID. Oh, we've still got some. That's fun, isn't it? Welcome back. We can see each other, we can hear each other, I've got legs. You can see them. My job today is to sort of set a bit of a baseline for us. So I'm going to be talking about carbon jargon. Who feels confident in knowing what the scopes of emission are, or what's the difference between net zero and carbon neutral? We feel confident about that? No, so that's my job. I've got to help you get to that. So we are the people, I don't know if you saw the big blue bus. The big blue bus went around the country. We were on the road for 3.5 months last year in the build up to COP26. In that is an electric bus, fully electric. We also did a double-decker hydrogen bus in Northern Ireland. It was crazy. That's a real photo. We did go to the Eden project, and this is what I'm going to take you through today. Is what we did with all of those people. So fortunately, I've had a very lovely introduction, so I don't need to talk too much about it. But just to give sort of background on Planet Mark, we're a sustainability certification, and the thing I wanted to share with you that sort of can give you confidence that it is absolutely possible for you to make a difference within your business, within your organisation, on tackling your carbon emissions. Our members in 2019, pre-COVID, not a COVID stat, reduced their absolute carbon emissions in 1 year by 12%. 2020, COVID stat, 24.5%. So you can make progress on these things really quite quickly when you get going. So, is it working now? It doesn't work. Well, that's going to be fun, isn't it? I should have brought my own. Right, so we did the Zero Carbon Tour, and so it's all about the Race to Zero was what the tour was about. Race to Zero is a UN initiative to get organisations pledging credible, robust and ambitious net zero targets. And so what I'd like to do here today is explain why is it net zero that we're gunning for? Why does it matter? What does that mean? What does that actually practically mean for you and your business? That's the tour we did. It was a little bit crazy. We went all over the place and met lots and lots of people. So, first question, why carbon? And what about all these other greenhouse gases, right? Methane, nitrous oxides, etc., etc. And so when you hear someone like me say carbon footprint or talk about what carbon emissions mean, what I really mean is carbon dioxide equivalent. You'll see it written as CO2e. And basically what that does is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, this wonderful document, internationally recognised, basically took all of the different greenhouse gases and it compared them. It said, what's the warming effect of methane versus carbon, or nitrous oxides versus carbon? And so take methane. Methane it has a much greater warming effect. It's like a much thicker blanket on the atmosphere, but it doesn't last as long. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere for as long. And so using those two metrics, duration and intensity, they were able to calculate and say, okay, for every 1 tonne of carbon dioxide, well, one tonne of methane, that equals 28 tonnes of carbon dioxide. And so when you look at carbon footprint, what it's saying is all of the greenhouse gas emissions are focused into this thing. So it's when we say carbon because it's easier, but what we really mean is all of it. So that's the first thing. Then under that, we've got 3 scopes of emission. Now, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of this, but it's really useful to know the distinction between the 3 when we start talking about things like carbon neutral, net zero. And it's quite straightforward. So scope 1, this one in the middle here, that's the fuel that you burn. It's your direct emissions. If you burn a fuel and it emits into the atmosphere, you are burning that fuel, creating that emission. So that's things like if you've got a gas heating system, or you've got a car that's petrol or diesel, you're burning that petrol and it's going straight into the atmosphere, that's your emission. Scope 1. Scope 2 is the energy that you use. It's your electricity, right? Because you're not the one burning the fuel, someone else is doing that somewhere else. But you are consuming the energy and you have control over how much energy you're using, so that's your Scope 2 indirect emission. Scope 3, everything else. Everything else. There are 15 different categories of Scope 3, and it's everything from your business travel, you get on trains, planes, whatever, your employee commuting, it's your pensions and your investments, it's your supply chain, what you buy, who you buy it from. You've got upstream and downstream, so it's the stuff that happens before it gets to you, the stuff you buy to make your products or services, and then also downstream of you. What do your customers do with your products and services? All of that is included in Scope 3. So you don't need to know the detail on Scope 3, but it's useful to recognise that Scope 3 is a big thing, and as much as 85 to 95% of many organisations' carbon footprints sits in Scope 3, right? So, this is what a carbon footprint looks like. And when you see a carbon footprint, you're looking for a few things, because you want to know what was measured. Because let's think about those scopes of emission. Let's imagine I came to you today and I said, I am the holiest of holy, I am the most sustainable of sustainables, I am a carbon neutral god, and then it turned out that I'd only measured my utility bills and my car, my Scope 1 and my Scope 2, which for most organisations or people on an individual level, my Scope 1, Scope 2 is my utility bills and my car if I owned one. And if I'd left out the other places I travel, the food I eat, the products I buy, you might not necessarily feel I'd done enough to justify my holier-than-thou approach, if that's all that I had done to justify me saying I'm more sustainable than you, right? So what's measured is really important. So you're looking for, what's the reporting year? What does this cover? What's the boundary? Is this just the UK operations of the business if it's international? Is it just one office? Is it just one site? And you want to know what emissions were measured, and that then tells you, and you can start to see what you might want to take action on. So you start coming up with your plans. You go, okay, am I likely to want to start with my sustainability initiatives on the bit that's 1% of my carbon footprint? Or is it probably a better idea for me to kick off by going for something that represents more than half? Right? Where am I going to start? Where's my low-hanging fruit likely to be? So, net zero, what does it mean? So, your scopes 1 and 2, the fuel you burn, the energy you use, the direct emissions, you have to get that to zero. And some of the ways you'll do that is you'll get renewable energy, you'll switch to electric vehicle or hydrogen fleets, you put in energy efficiency measures, all of these sorts of things will take you to absolute zero equivalent on your scopes 1 and 2. Scope 3, you have to get as close as possible to zero. And there's a whole array of things you do with this. You'd be engaging with your suppliers, you'd be looking to reduce your waste, you'd be trying to make better decisions about how you travel and how you move products and things around. You have to get that as close as possible to zero. And then your residual emissions, or your unavoidable emissions, and only those, are what you then use offsets for. But it has to be carbon removal offsets for net zero, which means it has to be your trees, peatland, seagrass, things that actually suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There are limited technologies, but they are incredibly limited and very expensive. Mother Nature's been doing a very good job of sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it for a very long time until we started digging it up. So natural solutions are the best thing here. But the really critical thing to note is the reduction is the emphasis. And I'll show you quite how much it's the emphasis in a second. But you've got, what net zero is acknowledging is that it's not possible or practical for most organisations to reach true zero. And if I'm a bike manufacturer, there's going to be some carbon in the frame of the bike, let alone in producing it. So I can't necessarily get to true zero. And that's what net zero does. It acknowledges that there's a gap, and there's a gap that needs to be filled. So I mentioned that there are carbon removal offsets, which are your trees and things. There's another type of offset, which is carbon avoidance. So that's your solar farms, it's your wind farms. By investing in these sorts of things, you're avoiding more going in. But if I make a solar farm, it doesn't suck any carbon dioxide down, right? It doesn't suck anything out. It just stops more going in. So that's carbon avoidance. And for net zero, you're not allowed to use carbon avoidance ones, which kind of makes sense, right? Because if I've got some emissions and I want to counteract them, I've got to suck that out. I can't just avoid more going in, I have to remove. By the way, I hope you're paying attention because there may or may not be a test. I might have mentioned that at the start. So, what does this look like? This is the easiest way we found of communicating this. So, this is what it would mean to go to true zero, right? We're at 100% now, and over time we go down, 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 and we hit the bottom line, true zero. Now, net zero says, many organisations that's not going to be possible. There's going to be a net. But this is the minimum of what that looks like. To achieve a net zero target, you have to reduce your baseline emissions by 90% or more. and only the last 10% is what you can classify as residual or unavoidable emissions, and you've got to justify why they are unavoidable. And then that, and only that, is what you use carbon removal offsets for. Carbon neutral, how does that compare to net zero? Well, what carbon neutral says is I can today offset with either carbon avoidance or carbon removal 100% of my emissions straight away. The other difference is that with net zero, I have to measure scopes 1, 2, and 3. I have to incorporate anything that is deemed to be material, anything that has a significant impact on my carbon footprint, I've got to include it. The minimum threshold for carbon neutrality, I have to measure my scopes 1 and 2, the fuel I burn, the energy I use. So an organisation can simply measure its scopes 1 and 2, offset 100% using either avoidance or removal offsets, and I'm carbon neutral today. Now you have to commit to reducing your scopes 1 and 2, but the emphasis is not so much on the reductions, it's just I'm going to pay my way out of trouble to a certain extent. So that's carbon neutrality. Carbon negative, climate positive, carbon positive, you hear these ones thrown around. They're not regulated at all. There's no official definition at this point. But what people tend to mean by that is instead of buying 100% offsets, they buy 200, 300 and 400% offsets against what they've got, and then they say, I'm now taking more out. But they might still only be measuring their utility bills and their car or fleet, if they own any. So the point that we're sort of making here, things like carbon neutral, climate positive, carbon negative, these are good things, but they're steps on a journey. They're not the end destination. Net zero is the end destination. Legally, you have to be net zero by 2050. It's not if, it's when. If you're in Scotland, it's 2045. And these dates are going to come forward. We know they're going to come forward. So it's not if, it's when. So net zero is the journey we're on. So by all means, go for carbon neutrality, but it's got to be framed as part of a wider net zero journey and strategy. Because to show what this sort of means, let's say I'm a company, I've got 1,000 tonnes of carbon emissions. In order to be carbon neutral, I'd buy 1,000 tonnes of carbon offsets now. I'm carbon neutral. To achieve net zero, I've got to reduce by 900 tonnes, and I've got to, or more, and I only offset the last 100 tonnes. To be carbon negative, climate positive, I'd be buying 2,000, 3,000 or 4,000 tonnes of offsets. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you can see how net zero is the journey we're on. This is the critical one. And that's why we're sort of backing it. So the call to action really is to set your net zero journey. Say how ambitious can you be in reaching net zero? What's your trajectory going to be? Plot that curve on a graph, because if you say, okay, I'm going to be net zero by 2030, and I'm starting today, you need to be reducing your absolute carbon footprint by about 14% per year. Right? So you start being able to then go, okay, that's what I've got to do. Okay, so now I can come up with a plan. How am I going to do that? Well, I look at my carbon footprint and I go, well, I might want to start with a bit that's like 60%. Oh, I can switch to renewable energy. Oh, that'll take a chunk off. Done. So you can then start coming up with a plan and actually make progress against it. So that's what the Race to Zero is all about. And this is what it means to set a credible net zero target. So you must pledge at a head of organisation level. You can't slip it past the CEO. They have to know about it. To reach net zero as soon as possible before 2050. Within 12 months of, so you can make the pledge today. Within 12 months of this date, you have to set an interim target representing at least a 50% reduction by 2030. That's the law as well. Then you have to take immediate, meaningful action towards achieving net zero within the first 12 months. So you can't just kick it down the road a couple of years. You have to have made progress against that target. And then you must report your progress against that target in the public domain at the end of that year. That is what a net zero pathway looks like. You come up with a plan, you implement it, and you report back. So I did warn that there might be a quiz. So if you get out your phones and go onto slido.com, you can either scan that QR code or you can use the code HEARTS. And we're going to do a few questions. And I'll explain why I'm doing that. I promise you I'm not just being mean. There is a reason why I do this. But I'm going to give you some scenarios these are just fake little scenarios of imagine a company's done this, and you can imagine this on their website, right? They go on their sustainability section, this is what they've done. They say this is their marketing, this is what we did. So Carbon Limited They found that they had 100 tonnes of carbon emissions through their electricity and their heating bills. Think about what they've measured there, electricity and heating bills. They commit to reducing their energy consumption each year, and they buy 100 tonnes of certified offsets, investing in solar farms. Think about what kind of offset that might be. So what have they done here? What does that mean? Have they made a net zero commitment there? Have they invested in carbon removal offsets? Have they gone carbon neutral? Have they gone carbon negative or positive? Or none of the above? What are we thinking? I can see we've got 39 people on. 4 people voted so far. I'll give you a few more seconds to think about it. So yeah, what have they measured there? What type of offset is that? Which of those is it? All right, we've got 16 people. I'm going to give you another few seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, we're ticking up. We've got 56 people on now. Give you a few more seconds. Oh, they're flying in. There we go. That's what we wanted. Okay. All right, we're going to have a look. Let's see what you said. Okay, 21% of you net zero commitment, 40% carbon removal offsets, 23% carbon neutral, 10% carbon negative or positive. Correct answer is they've gone carbon neutral. So, let's break this down. So, it's not a net zero commitment because all they've measured is their electricity and their heating bills, which is scopes 1 and 2. They haven't measured any scope 3. You have to incorporate at least some scope 3 into a net zero thing. They've also not set a target here. They haven't said what they're trying to achieve and by when. There's no commitment to sort of reducing over a certain period of time. There's no year mentioned. It's not carbon removal offsets because it's a solar farm. And remember, a solar farm does not suck down carbon emissions. It doesn't remove carbon from the atmosphere. It avoids more going in. So that's a carbon avoidance offset. It's not carbon removal. They have gone carbon neutral because they've measured their scopes 1 and 2. They've committed to reducing it year on year, which you have to do as well. And they've then bought enough offsets using carbon avoidance to go carbon neutral. So they have gone carbon neutral. They haven't gone carbon negative or positive. They could have done if they'd bought 200 tonnes, 300 tonnes, or 400 tonnes. That would be what that would look like. So that makes sense. All right, next question. COP Enterprises have purchased 1,000 tonnes of certified carbon offsets. They've switched to renewable energy. They've installed LED lighting and started transitioning their fleet to electric vehicles. And they encourage their employees to recycle. What have they done? You can imagine that one on our company website. Here's our list of things we've done on our sustainability. What have they done? What does this feature in? Is that a net zero commitment? Have they invested in carbon removal offsets? Do we know that? Have they gone carbon neutral? Have they gone carbon negative or positive? Or none of the above? What have they done here? Lots of great action, lots of good things happening. What have they done? All right, 24 people. I think we had about 50 vote last time, so we'll give you a few more seconds. 5, 4. Oh, people thinking about it. All right. Okay, I'm going to give you 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. So, 22%, 23% net zero commitment, 38% carbon removal offsets, 9%, 5%, and then 25% of you clocked that it was none of the above. Right, let's break this one down. So, it's not a net zero commitment. There's no indication of any measurement at all, or a reduction target. They're almost certainly reducing, but we don't know by how much. We don't know. We've got an idea. Carbon removal offsets. I'm being a bit mean here. They don't specify. Certified carbon option. I don't know what that means. Is it removal or I don't know. I can't make assumptions about that if they haven't told me what they've done. So we don't know is the answer to that one. So it's not carbon removal offsets. They haven't gone carbon neutral. They might have done. If they told me their carbon footprint was 1,000 tonnes, they might be carbon neutral. If they told me their carbon footprint was 500 tonnes, they might be carbon negative or positive. But I don't know. They haven't measured or indicated any form of measurement. So the answer to this is it's none of the above. There's lots of great action here, but we don't know what we're working with. This might be a 10,000 tonne footprint company. I've got no idea. Last one, and then I'll explain why I was being mean. TFOP Ventures is aiming to reduce its emissions across all 3 scopes by 90% plus by 2030, and they will invest in certified tree planting projects for the remaining 10%. Advanced warning, this one might be more than one. Have they here made a net zero commitment? Have they gone carbon neutral? Have they invested in carbon removal offsets? Have they gone carbon negative or positive, or none of the above? What are we thinking? So, reducing across all three scopes, 90% plus by 2030. Certified tree planting projects. What have they done? All right, you've got the idea of the game. So why am I being mean to you? Yeah, I'll start answering now. So you can imagine these on websites, right? You can imagine this on their company pages. Now, if the last one there, lots of great actions taking place, but if you're not measuring it, how do you know what's happening? So really simple metaphor for this. Imagine your CFO comes to you and says, right, I want you to save us money. I want you to cut money from the budget. I don't want you to measure anything. I don't want you to set any targets. I just want you to come up with a list of things that we can do that we think will save us money, and then that's what we'll tell our investors and they'll be very pleased with us. No. We won't know if we've succeeded. We won't know won't know what worked best, whether it was worth the investment in order to do that cost-saving initiative. It would be chaos. So the real simple premise here is you can't manage what you don't measure, and you can't progress towards something you haven't set a target for. And so it's really critical. And then, equally, people cannot make assumptions about what you're doing if you don't tell them in clear language and common terms what you have done. So what have we got here? Right, 84% people have gotten the idea of this game now. So 84% net zero commitment, 27% carbon neutral, 73% carbon removal. Correct answer is they've made a net zero commitment and it's carbon removal offsets. So it is a net zero commitment, measuring across all three scopes, reducing by 90% or more by 2030. That's within the range. And it's carbon removal offsets because it's tree planting. Trees suck carbon dioxide down, they're very good at it. So that's why it's those two. It's not carbon neutral. They could go carbon neutral. You could do all four. If they said that they had bought 100% of offsets now today, they could go carbon neutral and set a net zero target. They could get carbon negative or carbon positive by buying 200%, 300%. So you can do all four. But in this instance, what we know is they've made a net zero commitment and they've invested in carbon removal offsets. Let's see who did well. Oh, well done. We've got 2 3 out of 3s. Round of applause for David and William. Round of applause for David and William there. Honestly, I've done this with about 8,000 people, and people don't get 3 out of 3 very often. We trip a lot of people up with this. So this is a call to action. And I'm going to end with a little quote from David Attenborough, because it wouldn't be a talk on sustainability without it. So this is what David said about this year. This is a crucial moment in our history. This could be a year for positive change for ourselves, for our planet, and for the wonderful creatures with which we share it. A year the world could remember proudly and say that we made a difference. And so our call to action for you is to make a difference, to be a part of that change. And you can do that by, if you're not confident, you don't know quite where to start, we have Net Zero Carbon Essentials workshops that go on every 6 weeks virtually, CPD accredited with 3 hours, so you can really get to grips with what does this mean, what do I need to measure, how do I set my target, what does my pathway, and we've got a calculated tool you can use to sort of track your pathway and understand what that means for you each year and then track against it. We'd ask you to make your net zero commitment. Join the race. I love the metaphor of the race to zero because this is a race. It is a race. There are going to be winners and there are going to be losers in this race. There's no questions about that. However, critically, this is a race that we will all win or we will all lose together. And so it's really critical that we work with our suppliers, our customers, our employees, our colleagues, our friends, our families to help hold one another's hands and help each other along the journey. And the best way we can have of doing that is share what you're doing. So share your carbon stories. If you've done something that's worked really well, tell people about it. If you've done something and it didn't, tell people about it. We learn by hearing, oh, here's what we did, this is how much it cost us, this was the payback period and the return on investment, and you know what, here's the mistake we made, this is what we would do differently if we were to do that again. So that's what we love for you to do, is to figure, understand where you are, set a net zero target, and then share your carbon story, share what's working. And with that, I will wrap up. And if anyone has any questions, I think we've got like maybe 1 or 2 minutes for questions. Yes.
What's the web address for the workshops?
Oh, good question.
Can't find it on the website, sorry.
That's a good question. We will sort that. So it's on Eventbrite. Yeah, it's on Eventbrite. But if you it should be on planetmark.com under events. If you go to events, but I will find a way of getting that to you. That's a good. Before the answer was zerocarbontour.com, but you can go to zerocarbontour.com. That will help you lots. There's lots of. We gathered 230 case studies when we went around the country, and you can go to this wonderful website called carboncopy.eco, carboncopy.eco, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of tangible stories of what organisations have done to reduce their carbon emissions that you can copy. That's the whole premise. It's stuff that you can copy. So you can go on there and you can filter. You can say, I want to see an organisation of a similar size to me in a similar industry, and what did they do to cut carbon emissions and save money in the process? Kind of interesting, right? So this is what you can do when you share those stories. You inspire other people to take action, and you magnify your own impact tenfold. But yes, any other?
Can I? Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. So from scope 1 and 2 are sort of easier to sort of quantify and address. How can businesses influence their scope 3s, especially if you're in manufacturing or if you are, how do you influence your supply chain?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing to say is that there's a range of scope 3 emissions that are low-hanging fruit. So your waste is a scope 3 emission. That's easier to measure. So your paper consumption is a relatively easy one to measure. Employee commuting. You can do a survey of your employees and ask how do they tend to get into the office each week. And you can use that to calculate that as a scope 3 emission. So there's a range of them that you can get to relatively easily. In answer to the question of how do you influence your suppliers, it can be hard, right? Particularly if you're a small business. You know, how much power do I have to go out and influence my customers or my suppliers? First thing to say, just ask questions. Just ask them. Seriously, just ask them. Have you started measuring your carbon footprint? Do you have a plan on how you're going to reduce it? You're not making any demands there, you're just asking a question. But if you and enough of their other customers ask that same question, they're going to make changes. And I chair the Sustainability Task Force at the Institute of Directors, and I've lost count of the number of conversations I've had with massive corporate CEOs who have told me that they're changing massive parts of their strategy at board level, and one of their primary rationale for doing that was because graduates are asking questions about the company's sustainability credentials in an interview. That's board level strategy being influenced by someone who doesn't even work for the company. They might not get the job, but they're influencing company strategy because they asked a question. You can do the same thing with your supply chain without making demands. The other really critical thing to note here, and I should definitely mention this, the pressure that is coming down the pipeline within the next 12 months is unprecedented. We've said that a lot in the last 2 years, right? But it is. So, for example, all listed companies in the UK now have to have a net zero strategy by 2023. Now, you might not be a listed company, but do you do business with one? Is one of your clients a listed company? Is one of your clients a financial institution? If the answer to that question is yes, you are part of their supply chain, and they are coming for your carbon footprint, because they have to do that as part of their net zero strategy. So Tesco's, 24th of September last year, sent an email to every single one of their suppliers saying, we need your carbon footprint by the end of the year. 3 months notice, thanks for that. We need your net zero target by the end of next year. It needs to be a science-based target with a 50% reduction by 2030 by the end of 2023. And if you haven't switched to a renewable energy provider yet, do it. And the message being, if you don't do these things, we will replace you. Microsoft, Salesforce have put into every single one of their supplier contracts, you have to have a net zero strategy within 2 years or you're gone. So the pressure coming down the pipe, imagine when you receive that email from your biggest client, do you want to be going, yeah, you know what, here you go, we're done. And actually, if any of your other suppliers drop off, we might be able to fill that gap for you. Or do you want to be on the flip side and going, shit, I'm now in a scramble to get this together, and you then reach out to people for help and say, I've got 3 months to pull together a carbon footprint, and they turn around and go, yeah, but we're quite busy. we've got a lot of people asking us for this now. So it might take us a bit of time to get to that, and you're going to have to figure it all out from scratch. So getting ahead of the curve, there are huge opportunities here. And you can come and talk to me about the opportunities. We'll be around all day. But I'll wrap up now. But basically, you're either on the risk side of the coin or you're on the opportunity side of the coin. And it's up to all of us to decide which side of that we want to be on. But thank you very much for your time. I hope it was helpful.